From above, the Amazon is not a forest. It is an endless green ocean, each tree a wave, each shadow a depth unknown. The horizon swallows itself in layers of mist, shifting like breath over the lungs of the earth. The sound is alive, cicadas droning, parrots shrieking a heartbeat of rain somewhere far away. Beneath this canopy lies a labyrinth older than any city, a place where light is a rumor, and the air is thick with the scent of damp earth, and something watching. The camera dives lower, cutting through tangled emerald until the sky disappears entirely. Shafts of light slice down like spears caught in the slow dance of drifting spores. Somewhere in this cathedral of leaves, movement barely a flicker. Then he steps into view, gaunt, clothes shredded into ribbons, skin a map of cuts and insect bites. His eyes, sunken and sharp, scan the shadows as if each one holds a memory he would rather not recall. This is the man who would later be known only as the survivor. His name before all of this belonged to a quiet life. A carpenter from a riverside town. No criminal record. No public ambition. Yet one morning, without telling anyone, he loaded a small pack, boarded a narrow canoe, and paddled into the Amazon's heart. No GPS, no radio, no clear reason. For 40 days, the jungle became his world and possibly his prison. He would emerge, alive but not unchanged. His first step back into human company was not relief, but hesitation, as though he had crossed some unseen border and was unsure if he belonged on this side anymore. What happened in that span of days? Why does he avoid speaking of it? The rescue team remembers his weightless frame, the way he flinched at certain bird calls, how his gaze drifted to the tree line as if expecting someone or something. There is a single recording from that day. As they pulled him into the boat, someone asked what had happened. The wind picked up, carrying his words away, but the microphone caught just enough. He whispered once, then again, softer words the rescuers refused to repeat. The image freezes on his hollow face. The jungle looms behind him, endless and unmoved. Whatever happened in there, it stayed with him. And perhaps it's still out there waiting. Next, we'll follow his trail back to the day he vanished, and the signs that this journey was never meant to be ordinary. At the edge of the Amazon, where the river widens into a slow brown mirror, there is a place the maps barely bother to name. A cluster of weathered wooden houses, their stilts sunk deep into the mud. The air smells of wet timber diesel fuel and the faint metallic tang of rain yet to fall. This is the last place where the rules of the modern world still half apply. Beyond here, the jungle has its own laws. The locals call it Porto da Névoa, Port of Mist. Even at midday, a pale haze lingers above the water, softening edges, muting colors, as though the place exists halfway in memory. Children play barefoot on the warped pier. Old men sit on overturned crates, chewing tobacco, their eyes following strangers the way hunters watch movement in the brush. It was here the morning before. The rains came that the man they would call the survivor arrived. He carried nothing but a worn canvas pack and a machete in a cracked leather sheath. The innkeeper remembers him asking for a room just for the night and paying in cash, too much cash, she said, as though he didn't expect to need the rest. The people of Porto da Névoa are used to travelers, scientists, gold prospectors, thrill seekers, chasing a headline, but they are equally used to seeing those same people vanish into the green and never come back. In the cafe by the river, locals speak of them in the same tone others reserve for storms or landslides, inevitable impersonal. Tragedies. They told him the forest swallows men. They told him about the heat that cooks you from the inside the rivers where caimans wait like shadows until the water closes over you. But they also told him the older stories. One fisherman leaned across the table, voice dropping to a whisper. It's not just the animals. There are things older than them. He spoke of the Encantados river spirits who lure you deeper with the sound of music no one else can hear. A woman selling fruit warned of the Curupira, a trickster with backward feet who leads hunters in circles until they die of thirst. An old man, eyes milky with cataracts, mentioned something else, a word in a dialect no one wrote down, then spat on the ground as if to undo the curse of saying it. Even the practical warnings carried an undertone that made the air feel heavier. A biologist passing through told of a colleague who had followed a rare bird call into the forest and never found his way back. "The thing is," she said, "I heard that same bird the next morning, but it's not native to this region." That night rain began to fall, thick, warm drops that tapped on tin roofs like impatient fingers. The man sat alone on the inn's porch, staring at the black line of forest across the water. When the owner offered him another beer, he shook his head. Instead, he took a small weathered notebook from his pack and wrote something quickly before sliding it back inside. At dawn, the river was a sheet of silver mist. He stood on the dock, speaking quietly with a boatman whose face stayed expressionless. The others watched from the shore, some curious, some pitying. They saw him step into the narrow wooden boat, the hull barely rocking under his weight. He sat near the bow, machete at his side, gaze fixed forward as if the jungle had already called his name. The boatman untied the rope. With each pull of the shore grew smaller, the figures of the onlookers fading into shapes, then into nothing. The current carried them toward the green wall where the river bends a place where even sunlight hesitates, and then he was gone, swallowed by the bend, by the mist, by the forest. That was the last time anyone in Porto de Nevoa saw him for over a month. Next we follow him into the first days beyond the bend, when the jungle still seemed only dangerous before it became something else entirely. The first thing that struck him was the sound, not the tranquil birdsong tourists imagine, but a layered, relentless wall of noise, chirps, clicks, bellows, and the strange metallic rasp of unseen insects. At first, it was overwhelming, like stepping into a crowd where every voice spoke a different language at once. But after a few hours, he began to notice the patterns. The low, throbbing hum that marked the arrival of dusk, the sudden silences that were not random, but warnings. The river was his lifeline. It curved and twisted, but its current was a constant truth, always downstream, always toward civilization, if he needed to turn back. He learned to read its moods, the way a swirl near the bank hinted at submerged roots, the faint change in color, where a tributary joined in. During the day, he used the sun when it showed itself through breaks in the canopy. When it didn't, he followed the flow. He carried no tent, only a thin tarp. The first shelter he built was a crude lean-to wedged between two broad tree trunks. The tarp stretched tight to shed the rain. He lined the floor with palm fronds to keep from lying directly on the damp earth, both for comfort and to avoid the small patient creatures that searched the leaf litter for food at night. But the forest made its own rules about comfort. Mosquitoes found every gap in his clothing. Ants, tiny, almost invisible, burned like fire when they bit. Sometimes he'd wake to a faint rustling near his feet, too heavy for insects, too deliberate for wind. Each time when he sat up quickly, the sound stopped. The longer he stayed, the more he realized nothing in the jungle was ever truly alone. Parrots squabbled overhead, Monkeys hurled branches from a distance, and somewhere in the dark tangles beyond the tree line something else watched. He couldn't see it, but he felt it a prickle at the back of his neck when he stooped to fill his canteen, the sense of eyes tracking his movements when he bathed in the shallows. On the third day, he found a patch of foliage flattened in a way that suggested more than just wind or rain. Some of the leaves bore shallow cuts, almost like tool marks. Nearby, half buried in the mud, was a fragment of charcoal still smelling faintly of smoke. He scanned the trees, listening. Nothing moved, yet the noise of the jungle seemed to have shifted, less chaotic, more attentive. Food was a constant worry. He snared small fish with lines fashioned from cord, and hooks bent from wire foraged for palm hearts and wild berries he recognized. But each trip away from the river's edge felt like stepping into a throat that might close around him. Paths twisted back on themselves, tree roots disguised as snakes, sudden holes where the ground gave way to hidden streams. He told himself the disturbed foliage could be the work of other travelers, loggers perhaps, or hunters. But he had seen no boats, heard no engines, only the occasional trace, a footprint too large for a jaguar, too human to ignore. The marks never seemed fresh yet. The feeling they left behind was. By the end of the first week, his senses were sharpened in ways he hadn't expected. He could smell the river before he saw it, feel the air shift before rain fell. But that heightened. Awareness brought something else, a growing unease that each sound in the jungle was part of a larger conversation, and that he had unknowingly become the subject. On the 10th night, lying in his shelter, with the tarp snapping softly in the wind, he heard it for the first time. A whistle, short, sharp, and almost human. It came from deep in the trees where the darkness was thickest. A pause, then another slightly lower in pitch. He sat up, heart pounding. The jungle noise faded, replaced by a heavy, listening silence. Then the whistle came again, closer this time, and in that moment he knew it was not the call of any bird. In the Amazon night belongs to the hunters. The first time he heard it, soft measured footfalls in the damp earth, circling just beyond the firelight. He froze. His breathing slowed, every muscle locked in place. The steps were too deliberate to be a bore too heavy for a monkey. They paused, resumed, paused again. When he finally turned his head toward the sound, the glow of two golden orbs caught the light of the fire, motionless and unblinking. A jaguar. It didn't lunge, didn't growl. It simply stood there as though measuring him. Then, with a slow blink, it melted back into the darkness. He didn't sleep that night knowing the cat was still out, there patient as the rain. From then on, the jungle seemed to test him every dusk. Snakes, some coiled on branches, others lying like thick, motionless ropes across his path, forced him to watch every step. Once, while bending to refill his canteen, he heard a hiss, so close it felt inside his ear. He turned slowly to find a massive bushmaster, its head lifted tongue tasting the air. He backed away, his bare feet sinking in the mud, never turning his back, until the serpent slid away into the undergrowth. Insects were the invisible enemy. Clouds of mosquitoes bled him nightly, leaving swollen welts that throbbed with heat. Sweat made the bites sting, but the real danger was the fever they carried. Then came the ants, columns of them invading his lean-to, biting through the night, until he woke, gasping from the fire on his skin. He learned to sleep off the ground when he could, though even then some nights the rustle of wings above meant assassin bugs waiting to drop from branches. Food became another kind of battle. His small stash of dried fish vanished one morning, scattered. bones the only clue. He suspected a coati or raccoon until he saw the marks on the wooden container, deep grooves too far apart to be any small animal. They looked almost deliberate. Some signs didn't fit the forest's known predators. One morning he found prints in the mud near his shelter, 5-toed, roughly human-shaped, but far too large, each step sunk deep, as if the thing weighed more than any man. That day the forest was silent for hours, as if waiting. There were nights when the sounds came in patterns, 3 slow knocks on wood, then a pause, then 3 again. Sometimes it was whistles like those he'd heard before. Other times it was a strange guttural call, rising and falling in a way no known animal made. He tried telling himself it was just a bird, or maybe monkeys playing tricks. But deep down, he knew the rhythm in those sounds felt intentional. Once, while gutting a fish by the riverbank, he felt the air shift behind him. He turned just in time to see something large and low vanish between the trees, bigger than a man moving in near. Silence. All he caught was the faint shimmer of mottled fur or skin, the shadow swallowed by foliage before his eyes could focus. The worst was the 3rd week. The moon was high, pale light filtering through the canopy. He had drifted into a light sleep when the fire crackled, then sputtered. Something was moving just beyond it, slow and careful. He sat up, hand gripping his knife. 2 shapes were there. Now 2 sets of eyes, one low to the ground, the other higher, almost at his own height. They didn't advance, they didn't retreat, they just watched. Then in unison both turned and slipped away without a sound. The line between predator and something else blurred more with each night. In the daylight he fought to keep his traps in working order, each one a small insurance against hunger. But on the 22nd night he woke to find his best snare not broken, but disassembled. The cord was untied, the trigger stick set neatly aside. That was not the work of a jaguar. Somewhere something had been close enough to touch his camp, and it had hands. The jungle the locals had warned was never empty. Even in the silence between insect cries and bird calls, something ancient moved unseen. They spoke of the Curupira, a guardian spirit with hair the color of embers and feet turned backward to confuse those who tried to track it. Hunters claimed the Curupira's laughter could lead the greedy in circles until they collapsed from thirst. Others swore they'd found fresh prints in the mud that led deeper into the forest, only to realize the toes pointed the wrong way. By the 2nd week he stopped dismissing those stories. It began with flickers at the edge of vision, a flash of skin the color of bark, a limb bending in a way human joints should not. Once, while following a stream, he glimpsed a figure crouched across the water. Its head turned toward him, though its body did not, and the motion was wrong, too slow, as if time itself dragged on it. Then it was gone, swallowed by the foliage without a sound. At night, when the forest became a labyrinth of shadow and moonlight, he heard voices, not the calls of animals, but murmurs too soft to catch the words, too steady to be wind. They would fade if he moved toward them, then reappear behind him closer than before. Sleep came only in fitful bursts, punctuated by the sensation of being observed from just beyond the firelight. He thought of the Encantados, river beings said to take human form, sometimes luring travelers to join them beneath the water. The villagers in the last outpost had whispered about dolphins with smiles, 2 wide eyes, too knowing. If they call your name, an old woman had warned, you must not answer. One night by the riverbank, he heard something splashing. The moon caught a pale shape gliding through the current. For a moment it rose, and he swore he saw a face human, but the eyes larger, blacker, reflecting no light. Then it sank without a ripple. Hunger gnawed at him, but so did doubt. Was he seeing things born from isolation? Or was the forest stripping away the modern world's thin layer of disbelief, revealing what had always been here? The strangest encounter came after a day of constant rain. Exhausted, he stumbled through a stand of palm and saw it, a shelter. Not a crude lean-to like his own, but a perfectly constructed hut of woven palm fronds raised slightly off the ground on smooth, straight poles. It was clean, too clean, no debris, no leaves blown inside. He searched for tracks, any sign of who built it, but the ground was pristine. Even the rain had not muddied it. It felt wrong to step inside. The air was cooler there still, as if the world outside the shelter was far away. He sat only for a moment listening. The forest beyond seemed muted, as though sound refused to cross the threshold. Then, just at the edge of hearing, came 3 slow knocks on wood from somewhere deep in the trees. He left quickly, the image of that perfect empty home burning in his mind. Days later he could still picture it standing alone in the endless green, waiting for someone to return. By the 3rd week, his body had become a shadow of itself. Ribs pressed against skin muscles, slackened movement slowed to a weary shuffle. His hands trembled even when empty. The forest, once a deafening symphony, began to feel distant, muted, as though a wall of glass now stood between him and the living world. He learned that hunger was not just a dull ache in the stomach, it was a thief. It stole his strength first, then his sense of time, and finally the certainty of what was real. Days bled into one another, their boundaries marked only by the fading of light and the brief flare of his fire. Dehydration brought fever, and with it the hallucinations. At least he told himself they were hallucinations. He began to hear conversations nearby, whispered exchanges in a language he didn't know, syllables curling and breaking like wind through reeds. Sometimes they were accompanied by faint laughter light and quick fading before he could focus on it. He dreamed with his eyes open. Metallic glints appeared deep in the undergrowth like sunlight flashing off steel, but when he pushed through vines and branches to investigate, there was nothing. Once he thought he saw a silver object half buried in the soil, no larger than his palm. He bent down, reached for it, and blinked. His hand closed on nothing but wet leaves. The line between waking and dreaming blurred. He'd start walking toward a sound or a shape only to wake and find himself standing ankle-deep in swamp water, not remembering how he got there. Then one morning, everything changed. He woke to the smell of food, fresh, warm food. Outside his shelter, placed neatly on a broad leaf, was a small bundle, a cluster of ripe fruit, a handful of roasted nuts, and something else, meat, cooked its surface glistening with fat. There were no footprints, no broken twigs, no sign of approach. The leaf itself was perfectly clean, unblemished by the mud that covered everything else. He stared at it for a long time, torn between instinct and suspicion. His stomach screamed at him to eat, but his mind whispered questions. Who had done this? How did they get so close without waking him? And why leave food instead of making contact? In the end, he ate. The taste was almost overwhelming, the sweetness and salt flooding his senses until he thought he might weep. But it was not relief, it was something sharper, a sense that an invisible threshold had been crossed. That night he tried to stay awake to catch sight of his unknown benefactor. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Around midnight, exhaustion overtook him, his eyelids dragging down like lead. When he woke at dawn, the leaf was there again this time, with a small earthen bowl of clear water, cool as if drawn from a deep spring. The gifts kept coming each dawn, more precise, more deliberate. Sometimes the food was wrapped in palm fibers, tied with knots he did not recognize. Sometimes it was something he hadn't seen anywhere else in the forest, fruit, with skins like glassy amber, or a dried root with a taste of honey. At first, he told himself it was luck, some coincidence of nature, a strange but benign miracle. But as the days passed, another possibility took root, a possibility far more unsettling. Someone or something knew exactly where he slept, and they were watching. By the time the 35th dawn bled pale gold through the canopy, he no longer doubted. The pattern, the food, the water, the untouched perimeter around his shelter, it was too exact, too intentional. The unseen presence that had hovered at the edge of his senses for weeks was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. And then, on a damp, heat-heavy afternoon, the certainty stepped into view. He was sitting cross-legged near the fire, peeling the thick skin from a strange root, when a shift in the forest's rhythm stopped his hands. It was not. Sound that caught him there was none. It was the absence of it. The cicadas fell silent, the chattering parrots faded mid-call, the constant rustle of hidden movement stilled. The air grew thick, as if the forest itself had drawn a breath and held it. When he looked up, they were there. A dozen figures half hidden among the trees. Human, at least in outline. Limbs, torsos, heads, shaped in ways his mind recognized, but the recognition was uneasy, strained as though he were looking at a reflection warped by water. Their skin was not a single shade, but a living mosaic of patterns, streaks, dappled patches, subtle gradations that mimicked bark leaves and shadow, so perfectly he wondered how many times he had looked directly at them without knowing. The eyes were the most arresting, large, black, depthless. They didn't glisten like a human's. They absorbed light, drawing it inward. He felt the weight of their gaze as a physical thing pressing on his chest. They stood in utter stillness. No words, no gestures. The first wave of fear was animal, a primal jolt that made him want to run without thinking. The second was stranger, the sense that these watchers were not hostile, not friendly either, just present, studying. He raised a hand in the simplest gesture of greeting he knew. None of them moved, but something subtle changed shoulders. Relaxed heads tilted slightly as if acknowledging his attempt. Minutes passed, or hours. The sky shifted from gold to bruised purple, the shadows deepening around their shapes until the forest swallowed them. When he blinked, they were gone. From that day they returned. Sometimes 2, sometimes 5, once as many as 20. Always silent, always watching from a distance that was close enough to feel intentional, yet just far enough that he could never close it. In his later account, he described moments when the air between them felt charged, as though they were communicating, on a frequency he couldn't hear but could somehow feel. Once he thought he caught the faintest hum, low resonant, not from their throats but from the space itself. Were they human? That was the question that would divide everyone who heard his story. Some anthropologists suggested they could be members of an uncontacted tribe, their camouflage the result of elaborate body paint and natural selection. The Amazon is vast, one expert said. There are still groups we've never documented, people living in complete isolation, adapting to their environment in ways we can hardly imagine. Others scoffed. Camouflage can't explain the eyes, one countered, or the way they vanish without sound, without disturbing so much as
A leaf. The man may have seen something, but not human beings as we know them.
There were bolder theories still that these were remnants of an older lineage predating Homo sapiens, a branch that never joined civilization's march, that learned to melt into the forest until they became an extension of it. If such a people existed, they would carry knowledge stretching back tens of thousands of years, perhaps older than the rainforest itself. He had no answers.
Only moments. The way one of them had mirrored his movements, tilting its head when he tilted, his leaning forward when he leaned forward. The way their skin shifted almost imperceptibly with the breeze, as though light and shadow obeyed them. And then on the 39th night,
everything changed. He woke to silence, not the oppressive, waiting silence that had heralded their arrival, but a hollow absence. No gifts outside the shelter, no sense of eyes in the tree line. The forest's rhythm had returned, noisy and chaotic, as if they had never been there at all. They were gone. But why, he could not stop asking himself, why leave after so many nights? And what had their watching meant? At dawn on the 40th day, the river mist lay so thick it seemed to erase the world. A patrol boat, its outboard engine chugging softly, nosed along the water like a cautious animal. The men aboard scanned the banks for debris, for signs of illegal fishing, anything to break the monotony of another humid morning. That's when they saw him. A lone figure crouched on the mudflats, knees pulled to chest skin the color of weathered leather. He was skeletal, every rib showing hair, matted into thick cords. The men shouted, but he didn't react. Only when the boat ground against the shore did his head turn slowly, as if the movement itself took deliberation. His eyes, sunken but sharp, fixed on them. And then, in a voice hoarse from disuse, he spoke a single sentence. None of the rescuers would ever repeat it. They hauled him aboard, draping a blanket over his shoulders. He didn't resist. His body was light disturbingly, so yet. His hands gripped the blanket's edge with wiry strength. One of the crew noticed he carried a small bundle, wrapped in leaves tied with twisted fiber. The man refused to let it out of his grasp until exhaustion finally pulled him under. When they opened the bundle, they found objects unlike anything they'd seen in the region. A strip of woven material so fine it seemed almost like silk, but with a resilience no local plant fiber could match. Small carvings, 4 in total, each cut from a dense, dark wood that shimmered faintly in the light. The shapes were abstract, but there was a rhythm to them, as though each figure was part of a sequence. Grooves too precise for a bone or stone blade
ran along their edges. One rescuer, a man who had worked the river for 20 years, swore the carvings seemed warm. They kept the items quiet. For the next hours, as the boat made its slow return downstream, the man slept fitfully, muttering in languages none of them recognized. By the time they reached the nearest military outpost, word of the discovery had preceded them. Uniformed officers were waiting.
They ignored the rescuers' attempts to explain, going straight for the bundle. "What are these?" one officer asked sharply. The crew shrugged. "We just found him with them." The officer didn't respond. He slipped the carvings and the woven strip into a black case, locking it with a small click. The case disappeared into the back of a truck. No receipt, no explanation. The rescued man was loaded into a separate vehicle, taken to a medical tent for observation. The crew, dismissed with curt thanks, never saw him or the objects again. Later, one of them would claim that the carvings matched nothing in any Amazonian museum, that the weaving techniques didn't belong to any known tribe. Another swore the confiscating Officers weren't local military at all. The official report made no mention of the artifacts. It simply stated, "Adult male identity unknown found alive after prolonged exposure in remote jungle. Severe malnutrition, possible delirium, no photographs, no records of the confiscated items." The next day he was flown to the city. As the helicopter rose over the treetops, the river winding beneath like a vein of liquid bronze, he pressed a hand to the small window. Whatever he'd whispered to the rescuers that morning, whatever had been taken from him, remained locked away both in his mind and somewhere far from public view in a black case that would never see daylight again. And the carvings were never seen again. In the first weeks after his rescue, newspapers called him the miracle of the Amazon. Photos circulated of a gaunt man stepping off a medical transport, his eyes downcast beneath a mop of unkempt hair. Commentators speculated on survival tactics, miracle resilience, even divine intervention. For a moment it seemed inevitable that his story would be told in full. It never was. He refused every interview request. Television crews camped outside the small apartment arranged for him by an unnamed benefactor, but the curtains never parted. When journalists did manage to corner him in public, he would simply shake his head and walk away without a word. Then came the disappearances. Neighbors claimed he would be gone for days, sometimes weeks without explanation. No friends visited, no family was ever mentioned. The only regular sighting was of him leaving at dawn with a weathered canvas satchel heading toward the bus station. He always returned thinner with fresh scratches on his arms and the smell of river mud clinging to his clothes. It might have remained an unsolved footnote in 100 conspiracy blogs if not for the leak. An anonymous source claiming to be a former hospital orderly sent scanned pages of what they alleged were his journal entries during recovery. The handwriting was uneven, the ink blotched as if written in haste or with trembling hands. One entry read, "The jungle has eyes that don't blink. They move when you do not. They listen when you are certain you are alone." Another, "I have seen them in my sleep. The same patterns on the skin, the same black eyes. But now the forest is not around us. Now it is water, endless water. They are watching the rivers." And then the most cryptic of all, "When they move, the world will notice. But by then, it will be too late to stop them." Experts dismissed the writings as the product of trauma, the fever echoes of a mind eroded by hunger and solitude. Yet the choice of words, "when they move," not if kept the conspiracy forums alive for years. Stranger still, the location where he had been found could never be precisely identified again. Search teams retraced his likely route only to find shifting channels, vanished clearings, and no trace of the artifacts taken from him. Even the military logs from the day of his rescue showed inconsistencies in coordinates. By the second year, after his return, he stopped appearing in public altogether. The last confirmed sighting was by a dock worker who swore he saw him boarding a freight boat heading upriver, his canvas satchel slung over one shoulder. No one knows if he came back. The question lingers like the damp heat of the rainforest itself. What exactly did he see in those 40 days? From above, the Amazon looks eternal, an unbroken quilt of emerald stretching beyond the horizon, each tree a single stitch in a vast living tapestry. The rivers cut through it like veins, glinting silver in the dying light, carrying secrets from deep inside to the edge of the known world. As the camera pulls higher, the canopy becomes a rippling ocean, restless, breathing, ancient. Somewhere below, countless lives move in silence unseen. Some are catalogued in field guides and museum drawers. Others have no names at all. Scientists remind us that more than 80% of this forest has never been truly explored. In those untouched miles, light falls where no human foot has pressed the soil, where entire ecosystems breathe and die without our knowledge. In those depths, the laws we think we understand may not apply, and in those depths, anything could survive. The image of the man who returned, gaunt, silent eyes, shadowed, fades into the green. His journal's warning whispers through the leaves. They are watching the rivers. The screen shifts to a grainy black and white satellite photo, its edges blurred by cloud. In the center, a narrow clearing breaks the forest's endless canopy. Their faint but visible are shapes traced into the earth, long interlocking curves, patterns almost identical to the confiscated carvings. The timestamp in the corner reads, 4 years after his return. The photo lingers. Above it, the forest swallows the clearing again, green shadows closing like a curtain. The rivers wind on, the wind stirs the leaves, and somewhere, in that endless expanse, the question remains, not whether something is there, but whether it wants to be found.